What's up, y'all? You're watching Union Minded. I'm your host, Eric, and today we are going to talk about some excerpts that I'm going to pull from a book that I'm reading that was gifted by one of you guys, which I am eternally grateful for. I'm currently reading two labor books, but this one is Labor's Untold Story. It's by Richard O. Boyer and Herbert M. Morris. And the reason I'm bringing this to you is because I was reading it today, and there were some passages that really stood out to me because they really spoke to contemporary America, and these were passages describing life 130 years ago. So it's wild to me how much it's so similar today's conditions versus those conditions back then. And so I'm going to read a couple paragraphs for you, and we'll discuss them. So here we go. While the big monopolists were growing richer, the farmers and workers were growing poorer. Farm prices were hitting all-time lows as it became cheaper to burn corn for fuel on the farms than to ship it to the cities. Workers saw their already meager wages drastically cut and unemployment rising to the estimated trade union figure of 4.5 million. Armies of unemployed roamed the country. Unemployed demonstrations became the order of the day. Among the most famous of these was one led by General Jacob S. Coxey of Massillon, Ohio, a greenbacker and populist. The march begun Easter Sunday, 1894, reached Washington on May 1st. The marchers, 500 strong, determined to present their demand for jobs through public work projects to Congress, were stopped by police stationed at the end of Pennsylvania Avenue. Coxey and other leaders were quickly arrested for stepping on the grass, at, and the demonstrators dispersed. Unable to deliver from the steps of the Capitol the speech he had prepared, Coxey issued the following statement. Up these steps, the lobbyists of trusts and corporations have passed unchallenged on their way to committee rooms, access to which we, the representatives of the toiling wealth producers, have been denied. It's interesting that he worded it that way, the toiling wealth producers. I would think that he worded it that way is because workers create all wealth. Owners do not create wealth. They benefit from workers creating wealth. We stand here today in behalf of millions of toilers whose petitions have been buried in committee rooms, whose prayers have been unresponded to, and whose opportunities for honest, remunerative labor have been taken away from them by unjust legislation, which protects idlers, speculators, and gamblers. Idlers, the bosses; speculators and gamblers, the Wall Street executives. That's pretty that's pretty deep for 1894, you know, talking about how it's easy for the swindlers and the owner class to get onto those committee floors and find favor with those legislators, but the working people get arrested right outside. It's the same today. If you think about who has access to those committees, it's the donor class. It's the high dollar lobbyists that get to go in there and demand action. It's not the working people. We have to protest in the halls and hope somebody opens the door and listens. Much has not changed. Much time has passed, but a whole lot has not changed. And then the other paragraph that I want to talk to you about talks about Eugene Debs. In this chapter, they're going into Eugene Debs's career as an organizer, and he was a remarkable organizer. But something that happened with the American Railway Union that I think is important to talk about um, is how corporations utilized racism as a tool and sowed those seeds in the early formation of the American Railway Union as poison, which ultimately led to its demise. And it's a tale that can be told in two paragraphs. So follow with me, if you will. The American Railway Union was born in Chicago on June 20th, 1893. From the first, it attracted national attention because industrialists feared an industrial basis of organization. Debs was elected president. L.W. Rogers was named editor of its proposed publications. Sylvester Kellier was elected secretary, and George Howard vice president. Headquarters were in Chicago. Dues were $1 a year, and even miners and longshoremen were eligible, providing they received their paychecks from a rail company. So this new union sought to bring all of the different types of railroad workers under one union umbrella. And the idea was that if they ever did have to do a work stoppage in order to negotiate for better wages, the work stoppage and the effort would be more successful if all of the workers across the different jobs participated in solidarity, because then it would be much harder for the railroad to be able to bring in scabs, to be able to undermine the strike and kind of lock out those strikers. The next paragraph is the one that is really informative of tactics that were used over 100 years ago. But the great and tragic weakness of the new union was its constitutional exclusion of Negroes. Its denial at birth of its own fundamental principle of the absolute unity of all railroad employees. This was a common problem in early unions where they were racist and they didn't want to let everybody into their unions. And early on, as I was learning this history, I was like, man, it was a very exclusionary tactic. And while some of those early unions were that way, this is an illuminating of a different type of tactic that I hadn't thought of before, and which I now have to consider as very devious and effective. Okay. So as you can see here, it's telling you that at the very first convention, they wrote it into the Constitution that Negroes were not allowed to be in this union. At its first national convention the following year, Debs led a bitter fight for the admission of Negroes and almost won. Later, he said that the exclusion of Negroes had been an important factor in the Union's defeat and death, and that the fight to exclude them had been led by those who were proved to be spies in the pay of the railroads. Now, they speak in a different type of English, but as you read that sentence, the fight to exclude them had been led by those who were proved to be spies in the pay of the railroads. That means the railroad companies were paying spies to argue for the exclusion of Black people in the American Railroad Union. They proved subsequently, he said, speaking of the leaders of the anti-Negro group, to have been traitors to the Union, sent to the convention at the instigation of the corporations to defeat the unity of the working class. They were spies sent by the corporations to the convention to spread racism, to divide up the working class. Very old tactics indeed. And it's something that we contemporarily cannot fall for. And if you noticed, ever since 2016 and the verbalization and the outright blatant display of racism that was renewed in 2016 led to a splitting of the working class. You had folks that were very upset at this very racist movement. And it's imperative that we inside of the labor movement do not allow that toxicity to enter into our movement. And that's why I always say it's critical that we are anti-racist, more so than anything else, because it's that discrimination that sows distrust and sows animosity and sows division. We can't have that. We are in a labor movement that believes in inclusion, it believes in solidarity. And the reason it believes in that is because historically, these are the only things that win against the owner class. So we have to be smarter than our opponents. And our opponents love to think that we are not thinking people, but we are. And we smarter than that. And you should be too. And that's all I got for you tonight. I hope this was informative for you guys. I thought it was very illuminating myself, and that's why I thought it was important enough to read it to you guys and bring it to you, probably to hopefully stimulate some conversations. All right. Anywho, my name's Eric. You're watching Union Minded, and remember, the fight is not left and right; it's up and down. It's going to take solidarity to win always. Each one teach one. Get out there and reach one. And remember, there can be no union without you and I, front and center. Peace.